Thanks very much for joining me. Let's start by being absolutely clear about what happened here. A young conservative activist, Charlie Kirk, tragically passed away. A husband, a father, a man with family and friends who are grieving. Whatever you think of his politics, and I disagreed with him on just about every issue, there should be a baseline of human decency in how we respond to death. But instead of honoring that, Republicans and their allies seized on a comment from Congresswoman Ilhan Omar to manufacture a controversy that was never about respect for the dead. It was about weaponizing grief to advance their reactionary agenda. Omar reposted material that was pointed, harsh, and critical of Kirk's political legacy. Was it controversial? Of course. But in a free country, elected officials have the right to express political viewpoints, even unpopular ones. That is what the First Amendment is all about. That is what democracy is about. You don't have to agree with what Omar said. I don't. But disagreement is not grounds for calls of deportation. Disagreement is not grounds for a national smear campaign. Yet within hours, the right-wing machine went into overdrive. They clipped her words out of context, blasted them across Fox News and social media, and painted her not as a critic of conservatism, but as some sort of enemy of America itself. And then Donald Trump entered the picture. Instead of urging calm, instead of saying let's disagree without dehumanizing, he did what he always does. He poured gasoline on the fire. He didn't just criticize Omar's remarks. He used them as a springboard to question her legitimacy as an American, to revive long-debunked conspiracy theories about her family, and to suggest she should not even be in this country. Think about how extraordinary and dangerous that is. A former president of the United States responding to the death of a political figure by calling for the deportation of a sitting member of Congress, that is not only reckless, it is authoritarian. Let us be honest about what is really going on. Republicans saw an opportunity to distract the public from their own failures. Their inability to pass legislation that helps working people, their obsession with culture wars instead of raising wages or lowering healthcare costs, their endless tax breaks for billionaires and corporations while ordinary Americans struggle. Rather than confront these realities, they decided to take Ilhan Omar's words, twist them, and create a spectacle designed to divide Americans against each other. And this is a pattern we have seen over and over again. When a Democrat, especially a woman of color, especially a Muslim immigrant, says something provocative, Republicans don't respond with honest debate. They don't say, let's argue about the merits. They say, deport her. They question her loyalty. They attack her identity. They attempt to turn policy disagreements into questions of whether someone even belongs in this country. That is what this was about from the very beginning. Here's the deeper point. In a healthy democracy, we understand that political disputes end at the ballot box. You don't silence your opponents by trying to exile them. You don't turn a funeral into a political weapon, and you don't exploit grief to score cheap points. Yet that is exactly what the Republican Party has done here. They have taken an emotional moment of national mourning and turned it into another episode of their never-ending culture war. Meanwhile, who pays the price? It's not Donald Trump, who sits in his mansion posting on social media. It's not Republican senators who rush the cable news to feign outrage. The people who pay the price are Muslim Americans, immigrant families, and anyone who has ever been told that they don't really belong here. Because when a leading political figure calls for deportation of a U.S. citizen serving in Congress, that rhetoric trickles down. It legitimizes harassment. It invites violence. And it corrodes the very fabric of American democracy. So when we talk about this controversy, let's not get lost in the noise about one repost, one metaphor, one heated comment. Let's look at the bigger picture. This was not about Ilhan Omar making a controversial remark. This was about Republicans exploiting that remark to spread hate and division, to distract from their own failures, and to normalize the idea that critics of their agenda, especially women of color, especially immigrants, are somehow not legitimate Americans. That is the story here. That is what we cannot allow to stand. Now, let's dig into how quickly this went from a disagreement over rhetoric to something far more sinister, full-blown xenophobia. Because Donald Trump didn't stop at criticizing Omar's comments. He went much further, turning what could have been a conversation about tone and timing into a smear campaign against her very existence as an American citizen. Within hours of Omar's post, Trump was on his social media platform recycling one of the ugliest, most racist conspiracy theories out there, that somehow she married her brother to game the immigration system. This claim has been investigated for years. It has been debunked again and again. But that doesn't matter to Trump or his allies. The truth is irrelevant. What matters is the ability to plant a seed of doubt, to make millions of Americans wonder, does she really belong here? That is the strategy. That is how xenophobia works in American politics. And let's be clear, this was not just some fringe blog tossing out nonsense. This was a former president of the United States, a man who still dominates the Republican Party, giving that lie a national platform. When he does that, it doesn't stay on the internet. It makes its way into town halls, into classrooms, into workplaces. Muslim Americans hear it at airports, at schools, at grocery stores. Suddenly, an entire community is under suspicion because one leader decided scapegoating was easier than serious debate. Trump then raised the stakes further by talking about deportation. Now, most Americans understand that Ilhan Omar is a naturalized citizen of this country. She has been elected by her constituents multiple times. She serves in the United States Congress. She is as American as anyone else serving in that body. Yet Trump decided to fan the flames of hatred by suggesting that citizenship itself is conditional. That maybe, if you're an immigrant, if you're a Muslim, if you're outspoken, your citizenship can be questioned and potentially stripped away. Do you know what message that sends? It tells every immigrant who has worked hard, paid taxes, and built a life here that their place in this country is never secure. It tells every refugee child who grows up in the United States that no matter what they achieve, even if they are elected to Congress, they can still be told to go back where you came from. That is not just offensive, that is profoundly dangerous to the very idea of American democracy. And let's not kid ourselves about why Republicans push this kind of rhetoric. They do it because they believe it works politically. They do it because stoking fear of immigrants distracts from their economic agenda of protecting the billionaire class. It is the oldest trick in the book. When working people start demanding higher wages, better health care, or lower drug prices, Republicans change the subject. They point the finger at immigrants. They create scapegoats. And Donald Trump has perfected that strategy. But history tells us where this leads. We have seen what happens when leaders start questioning who belongs and who doesn't. It doesn't stop with one politician or one community or one controversy. Once you normalize the idea that citizenship can be conditional, that loyalty can be judged based on where you were born, you open the door to authoritarianism. You create a society where disagreement with those in power can be punished not just with criticism, but with exile. That is the path Trump and Patel and their allies are dragging this country toward. It is worth emphasizing that this tactic is not new. We saw it when Trump attacked the so-called Squad years ago, telling elected women of color to go back to the countries they came from. We saw it when he launched his campaign by calling Mexican immigrants rapists and criminals. We saw it in the Muslim ban. We saw it in every attempt to weaponize people's fear of the other rather than deal with the real crises facing working families. The rhetoric about Ilhan Omar is part of a long and ugly pattern, and I'll tell you what it reveals. It reveals a party that no longer even pretends to have solutions for the challenges ordinary Americans face. Republicans have nothing to say about why insulin still costs hundreds of dollars a month. They have nothing to say about why housing costs are skyrocketing. They have nothing to say about why corporations pay zero in taxes while schools go underfunded. So instead, they scream about Ilhan Omar. They tell you the problem isn't corporate greed, it's immigrants. They tell you the issue isn't billionaire tax avoidance, it's Muslims in Congress. That's the bait and switch. That's the scam. So when you hear Donald Trump talk about deportation, understand what is really going on. He is not offering a policy, he is offering a distraction. He is saying, don't look at the billionaires. Don't look at the corporations. Don't look at the Republican politicians selling you out. Look at this one congresswoman instead. Blame her, fear her, attack her. That is how the politics of division has always worked, and it is why we have to reject it completely. Because at the end of the day, this is bigger than Ilhan Omar. It is about whether America will remain a multiracial democracy where citizenship is real, permanent, and equal for everyone, or whether Republicans succeed in making it conditional, fragile, and revocable for anyone they deem an outsider. That is the real fight. That is why this moment matters so much. What we are witnessing here is not just another nasty political fight. It is a direct assault on the foundations of American democracy. Because when a former president of the United States suggests that a sitting member of Congress does not belong in this country, when he entertains the idea that her citizenship should be called into question, he is not only targeting Ilhan Omar, he is attacking the very principle that underlies representative democracy, that all citizens, no matter their race, their religion, their birthplace, have the right to participate fully and equally in the political life of our nation. Let us be absolutely clear. Ilhan Omar was elected and re-elected by the people of her district in Minnesota. She is their representative. When Donald Trump says she should be deported, he is not just insulting her. He is insulting every single voter who cast a ballot for her. He is saying their voices do not matter. He is saying their choice can be nullified if he decides their representative is not American enough. That is profoundly undemocratic. And think about the precedent this sets. If Republicans can go after Omar today, who will it be tomorrow? Will they decide that other naturalized citizens are suspect? Will they question the loyalty of Catholic politicians because of the Pope? Will they say Jewish Americans can't be trusted because they might put Israel first? These kinds of loyalty tests are poison. They have no place in a democratic society. Yet that is exactly what Trump is encouraging his supporters to embrace. This is part of a much larger authoritarian trend we are seeing across the Republican Party. It's not just about Ilhan Omar, it's about a growing willingness to say that only certain kinds of people are truly American, that only certain voices are legitimate. You see it when they pass laws making it harder for young people and people of color to vote. You see it when they gerrymander districts to dilute the power of working class communities. You see it when they attack the press, the courts, and any institution that tries to hold them accountable. And you see it in the way they treat dissent as not just wrong, but illegitimate, even dangerous. That is not how democracy works. In a democracy, you win arguments by persuading people, not by silencing them. You don't exile your opponents. You debate them. You respect the outcome of elections even when you lose, and you recognize that the Constitution protects the rights of everyone, not just your supporters. The moment we start to accept that certain people's citizenship can be questioned because of their background or their beliefs, we are on a very slippery slope. Let me also say this. The attempt to delegitimize Ilhan Omar is not just an attack on democracy in the abstract. It has real consequences for millions of Americans who look like her, who pray like her, who came to this country as refugees or immigrants. When they hear Trump say Omar should be deported, they hear a message loud and clear: you will never truly belong. No matter what you achieve, no matter how many laws you follow, no matter how much you contribute, you will always be treated as an outsider. That is the message, and it is cruel, divisive, and profoundly un-American. And what is the impact of that message? It discourages participation. It tells young Muslim Americans not to run for office. It tells immigrants not to speak out. It chills dissent, and that is exactly the point. The Republican strategy is not only to discredit Omar, it is to send a warning to anyone who might follow in her footsteps. If you dare to raise your voice against us, if you dare to challenge our power, we will come after your very right to exist in this country. That is intimidation, plain and simple. Now, contrast this with the vision that Democrats and progressives are fighting for. We believe in a multiracial, inclusive democracy where your citizenship is not conditional, where your right to speak your mind does not depend on whether Donald Trump likes what you have to say, where your legitimacy as an American is not determined by your skin color, your religion, or your accent. That is the America we are trying to build. And it is exactly what Republicans are trying to tear down. We should also remember that freedom of speech is not just about the right to say popular things. It is about the right to say controversial things, even things that offend. That's the whole point. If free speech only protects you when you're praising those in power, it's not free speech at all. Ilhan Omar's comments about Charlie Kirk were controversial, yes, but in a democracy, the response to controversial speech is more speech, not deportation. The answer is debate, not exile. So let me be clear. The real threat to democracy here is not Ilhan Omar making a provocative statement. The real threat is a Republican Party that believes it can decide who belongs and who doesn't, who gets to speak and who doesn't, who counts as American and who doesn't. That is authoritarianism. That is what Trump and his allies are pushing, and we cannot allow it to take root in this country. This is not about one congresswoman. This is about the future of our democracy. Do we want to live in a country where elections matter, where all citizens are equal, where debate is vigorous but respectful, and where no one fears being exiled for their beliefs? Or do we want to live in a country where one party can decide that their opponents are not legitimate Americans, where dissent is punished with threats of deportation, and where democracy exists only for the few, not the many? That is the choice before us. And we must be clear-eyed about what is at stake. If we give in to this kind of xenophobic demagoguery, if we allow Trump and his allies to define who belongs, then we are surrendering the very essence of democracy itself. What happens when this kind of xenophobic rhetoric collides with a media ecosystem built to amplify outrage? We don't just get a political dust-up, we get a public spectacle that undermines safety, erodes trust, and pushes people closer to violence. And that is exactly what we saw in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's death, Ilhan Omar's remarks, and Donald Trump's escalation. The right-wing outrage machine went into overdrive. Cable news, talk radio, social media, influencers, all of them took Omar's words, stripped them of context, and replayed them again and again. They didn't stop at criticizing her judgment. They portrayed her as un-American, as dangerous, as someone who should be expelled from Congress or even expelled from the country. And because our media environment thrives on outrage, those clips spread far beyond the conservative base. They dominated headlines, they saturated timelines, they became the story of the week. But what was missing in that coverage? A sober understanding of what actually happened and what the real stakes were. Instead of focusing on the danger of a former president calling for deportation of a U.S. citizen, the media treated it as just another controversy, just another clash, in the endless cycle of partisan fights. That trivializes something deadly serious, because when one of the most powerful political figures in America questions the legitimacy of an elected official, that is not normal. That is not just politics as usual. That is an assault on democratic norms that should be treated with the gravity it deserves. And let us not forget how these spectacles affect the real world. At Kirk's memorial, tens of thousands of people gathered to grieve. But instead of being a space for mourning, it became a stage for politics. Republican leaders, including Trump and J.D. Vance, turned it into a rally, presenting themselves as the defenders of decency against Omar's supposed cruelty. Meanwhile, security at the event had to be ramped up dramatically because of the toxic atmosphere their rhetoric helped create. When you have prominent politicians calling their opponents enemies of America, when you have talking heads telling viewers that a sitting congresswoman is a fraud who should be deported, it creates conditions where unstable individuals feel justified in taking matters into their own hands. And we saw a glimpse of that danger when an armed individual impersonating law enforcement showed up near the memorial. That was not a coincidence. That was not an isolated incident. That was the logical consequence of a political culture where leaders use inflammatory language without regard for the consequences. Words have power. They shape perceptions. They shape behavior. And when leaders normalize the idea that opponents are illegitimate or dangerous, it is only a matter of time before someone acts on that message. The broader point is this: when our politics becomes a performance, when the media treats every controversy as another opportunity for ratings, when leaders prioritize viral moments over careful words, public safety suffers. Investigations are compromised. Communities are put at risk, and trust in institutions collapses. We saw this during Patel's reckless post about the Kirk shooting suspect. We saw it again in Trump's reckless social media attacks on Omar. Both were examples of leaders treating deadly serious issues as opportunities for performance, and in both cases, the costs were real. Let's also talk about the economics of outrage, because that is part of the story too. Media companies, especially on the right, make money by keeping people angry. Clips of Omar's comments drive engagement. Trump's posts about deportation drive clicks. Advertisers profit. Networks profit. Politicians raise money off of the outrage. But what does the public get in return? More division, more suspicion, more chaos. Working families who tune in hoping to learn about policies that affect their lives instead get a steady diet of culture war distractions. Meanwhile, the cost of insulin remains sky high, wages remain stagnant, the housing crisis worsens. But none of that gets the same attention as the endless spectacle of political feuds. And here is the cruel irony. While ordinary Americans are distracted by these manufactured controversies, the real beneficiaries are the very elites Republicans claim to oppose. Billionaires get their tax cuts. Corporations continue to dodge taxes. Lobbyists continue to write legislation, all while people are told to focus their anger not at Wall Street or Big Pharma or corporate greed, but at Ilhan Omar. That is how distraction politics works. And the media, by amplifying it, becomes complicit. There is also a cultural dimension we cannot ignore. In moments like this, when emotions are raw, Americans look to their leaders for examples of decency. They want reassurance that even in disagreement, there are still basic norms of respect that we all share. Instead, what did we get? Trump exploiting grief for political gain, Republican senators rushing to cameras to demand Omar's deportation, media outlets framing it as a both sides story, as if the question of whether we deport a sitting member of Congress is just another partisan talking point. This erodes our civic culture. It teaches people that nothing is sacred, not death, not mourning, not citizenship, not democracy. Everything is just another opportunity to score points, and when that becomes the norm, when every tragedy becomes a spectacle, when every disagreement becomes an existential crisis, it becomes impossible to solve the real problems facing our nation. Trust erodes, cynicism spreads, people tune out or retreat into their partisan corners, and the only ones who benefit are the powerful interests that thrive when people are divided and distracted. So we have to recognize what is happening here. This is not just about Ilhan Omar. It is about a political culture that rewards outrage over substance, performance over policy, spectacle over solutions, and unless we change course, unless we demand more from our leaders and our media, we will continue down a path where public trust collapses, public safety is jeopardized, and democracy itself is weakened. Let's be clear about what this all means for the future of our democracy. When a controversy like this erupts, when a member of Congress makes harsh remarks, when outrage spreads like wildfire, and when Donald Trump seizes on that outrage to question someone's very legitimacy as an American, we are not just talking about one bad news cycle, we are talking about the long-term health of a political system already teetering under enormous strain. First, the danger is not Ilhan Omar alone. The danger is what happens when millions of Americans are told over and over again that their elected leaders are not legitimate. That is what Trump has perfected. He did it when he questioned Barack Obama's birthplace. He did it when he claimed the 2020 election was stolen. And now he is doing it again by suggesting that Omar, a duly elected member of Congress, should be deported. This is not about debate on the issues. This is about undermining the basic premise of democracy, that we settle our disagreements at the ballot box, not by questioning whether certain Americans even belong here in the first place. Second, the risk is generational. Older Americans who have lived through the Cold War, the Civil Rights Movement, Vietnam, and Watergate understand what happens when trust in institutions collapses. They remember when our politics, as bitter as it was, still had certain guardrails. There were still boundaries of decency, still a shared belief that certain lines should not be crossed. Today, those guardrails are splintering, and younger Americans are growing up in a world where they don't see them at all. They see politics as endless spectacle, as theater, as noise. That is corrosive because democracy depends on citizens believing that the system can work. If they stop believing, the system stops working. Third, this controversy shows us the stakes for leadership. Leaders do not get to choose only the easy moments, the ribbon cuttings, the speeches, the applause. They are judged most in the moments of grief, of crisis, of tragedy. Ilhan Omar failed that test when she mocked the death of Charlie Kirk instead of showing respect for a grieving family. Donald Trump failed that test when he turned a family's loss into an opportunity to attack an opponent's legitimacy. Both failures, in different ways, chipped away at the kind of moral leadership this country so desperately needs. And when politicians fail in those moments, ordinary Americans pay the price in cynicism, in division, in the loss of faith that public life can still have dignity. But there is also a lesson here about responsibility. Responsibility for politicians, yes, but also responsibility for us, the people. We cannot let ourselves become passive consumers of outrage. We cannot let social media platforms and cable networks decide for us what matters. Because when we do, we get caught in the cycle of distraction, arguing endlessly about inflammatory comments, while billionaires and corporations quietly continue to rig the economy against working people. The outrage machine thrives when we are too busy fighting each other to fight for the things that actually matter. Decent wages, affordable health care, affordable housing, a livable planet, and a democracy that works for all. And here is the truth. The American people deserve better. We deserve leaders who can disagree without dehumanizing. We deserve media that prioritizes accuracy over virality. We deserve institutions that resist the temptation to perform and instead focus on delivering justice, safety, and dignity. That is not a utopian dream. That is the bare minimum for a healthy democracy. So where do we go from here? First, we demand accountability, not just for Ilhan Omar's poor judgment, not just for Trump's dangerous rhetoric, but for the system that incentivizes both. That means real reforms to how money shapes politics. That means breaking the stranglehold of billionaires and corporations who benefit when we are divided. That means strengthening protections for democratic institutions so that no one, Republican or Democrat, can undermine them without consequence. Second, we rebuild trust where it matters most, in our communities. National politics may often feel like a circus, but local life is where democracy either lives or dies. When people know their neighbors, when they participate in school boards, unions, churches, mosques, synagogues, when they take responsibility for the shared spaces of their lives, they begin to see that democracy is not an abstract idea. It is something we do together every day. If we want to inoculate ourselves against the poison of performative politics, we must start by strengthening the bonds that make us resilient. Third, we have to speak plainly about what is at stake. The future of this country is not going to be decided by who wins the next argument on Twitter. It will be decided by whether working people can reclaim power from the billionaires and demagogues who exploit crises for their own gain. And that requires more than outrage. It requires organizing. It requires voting. It requires building movements strong enough to demand an economy and a democracy that serve all of us, not just the wealthy few. I want to end with this. The story of Ilhan Omar and Donald Trump is not just the story of two politicians locked in conflict. It is a mirror held up to America. It asks us what kind of politics we want, what kind of country we want, and what kind of leaders we are willing to accept. Do we want leaders who exploit tragedy for their own gain? Or do we want leaders who can rise above division, who can call us to our better angels, who can treat even their opponents with dignity? Those are the choices before us, and let's not kid ourselves. The path ahead will not be easy. The forces of division are strong. The temptation of spectacle is real, but I believe the American people are stronger. I believe we still know the difference between cruelty and compassion, between performance and principle, between self-interest and service. And I believe that if we demand better loudly, persistently, collectively, we can still build a country where decency is not mocked, where democracy is not hollowed out, and where the dignity of every single person is respected. That is the fight. That is the task. And the future of America depends on whether we are willing to take it up.